So in this video, I will show a way in which you can use Azure Arc itself to deploy more Azure Arc to your servers. And so what I mean by this is if we can leverage, or if we can at least get one Azure Arc enabled server into a given environment, typically maybe a lockdown on-premises environment, and that server has what I'll call network line of sight to those servers. Then we can have the ability to then use that Arc-enabled server to deploy to other servers remotely. Now, in this demonstration, I'm going to show a demonstration of this and some of the components to how to do this securely and how we can pass things that we don't want to have in the clear, such as passwords and SPN secrets and all of that stuff, using some of the Arc features and some of the Azure features, such as Key Vault. And this specific demonstration will be for Windows servers, but absolutely we could modify this somewhat to also apply to Linux servers, and I may look to demonstrate that in another video someday. But hopefully this is more than enough to give you an idea of how to use this for yourselves as is, or maybe with some slight modifications. So here we go. So to set this up, so in my environment, I have some Arc deployed machines. The nomenclature here, if you're familiar with our Arc Jumpstart portal, where you can get solutions to do test and dev and set up nested virtualization environments to kind of simulate things all within Azure to do your testing and evaluation of Arc, we can use this ArcBox deployment, which is what I have right here. So as you can see, I've got various servers with this ArcBox moniker. And so what this is, if I go over to the virtual environment that is simulating an on-premises environment, I've got a Hyper-V server, which is actually an Azure VM that's running nested virtualization, which is running the Hyper-V instance, but essentially it's a simulating hey, this is a network outside. These are servers that are virtual machines, happen to be virtual Hyper-V virtual machines. They could represent physical servers or even ESX servers, but essentially these are servers that are not Azure. And so what we want to do is we want to deploy the Arc agent to them so that we can use all of the wonderful features of Arc and some of the other features that Arc allows them to get, such as monitor, defender, policy, etc. So in this demonstration, I'm going to pick on this particular server, this ArcBox 12K22, and this is essentially just a Windows 2022 server that has the Arc-enabled agent already installed on it, and so you'll see that right here. And so we'll come back to that here in a bit. But again, we've got some Arc kind of for this to work. We need to have at least one Arc-enabled server in that given environment that we want to target and deploy the Arc agent to other servers. Okay, so before I do that, I want to just show you some of the elements that make this, and I kind of explain in the blog. One of the things we exploit and utilize here is Azure Key Vault. And why do we use Azure Key Vault? Because when it comes to like anything that's like Arc and Arc itself, when we deploy something that essentially needs to more or less take ownership of that system, and then eventually install extensions for defending and policy management and enforcement, it needs a set of credentials to do its job. And so what we can do with Key Vault is I've created these secrets here, and essentially for Arc to be deployed, regardless of how you deploy it, either manually or maybe through other tooling such as Configuration Manager or even like Active Directory Group Policy, inevitably there's an assumption, or rather we are required to use or have at our disposal local admin username and password for that target server or server. So I've created two variables here for my particular demonstration. So I have an encrypted secret here called admin name and one called admin password to hold those values securely. And at scale, we typically want to give access to ability to onboard Arc-enabled servers to our target resource group within our subscription, within our tenant. We can hand that off to what we call an SPN, or a service principal, that essentially allows us to give that service principal access to do those tasks, and not necessarily the user itself. But the user or the operator would have to have knowledge of, and a lot of times would have to put secrets in the clear, such as the APN secret, to use that client ID. And that's kind of insecure. So in this case, I've stuffed this also into secrets into this key value, right? So they're encrypted secrets that exist here. Now, before I move off on this, what's interesting about this is that, remember, we're going to do this with an Arc-enabled server. And one of the nice free things that I talked about in my last video about, hey, here's some awesome free stuff you get with once you Arc enable a server, is the ability to create and exploit and use what we call a system assigned identity. So if you recall, if you've watched that video, in fact, here's the link and I'll put this in my blog as well, but essentially I can now utilize what we call a system assigned identity. And what this allows us to do with an Arc enabled server is I can then, as an administrator of that Arc enabled server, I can actually run a little bit of PowerShell or a command line to essentially extract an access token. And that access token can then be used to access Azure things that I've given it access to, such as, and let me go back to my key vault here, such as maybe a key vault. So in this particular instance, you can see that I've given not a user, but I've given the machine, the Arc-enabled machine, access to my secrets within this key vault. And that's going to come important later, because what we're going to do in this example is we're going to extract that token from that during the processing of, onboarding another server into Arc to get at the admin user value, password value, client, etc. Okay, so we've got, so we're going to use an Arc-enabled server. We're going to use Key Vault. And so let's take a look at my script here. So let me pull that up. And so I've got a script, and again, I'll have links on this in the blog, but essentially this is a script that I've created to basically do this onboarding using another Arc-enabled server, is their managed ID, to essentially get the information, the secrets it needs to then go in and remotely access that server. So let's walk through this. So in this demonstration, the script really needs one parameter. I just need the IP address or the name of the server that we wish to target. So again, this script will essentially run on my Arc-enabled server, and essentially you're going to feed it what target server I wish to target to install Arc. And so the first thing it does is it basically says, hey, well, we got to access the token. We got to get that machine identity that has access to that key vault, because the operator itself does not need to have access to those values, but the managed ID, the server, can have access to those values. And so what this allows us to do is it can run this script and it can extract its token. And once we have the token that represents, hey, I'm this managed identity, let's go and grab the values we need. And so it does just that. It just grabs these 4 values. Now, again, it looks fairly complicated, the script, but really all I did here was I pretty much used this and just modified a few things. But essentially, I just cut and pasted the sample code that basically gets me to where, hey, I can get a token. And now I can use that token to extract my secrets. In this case, admin username, password, client ID, and secret. Okay, so then the next thing it does is we take that local admin and password that we need to basically authenticate to that server we're going to Arc enable to create a credential. And that credential is going to be used, and if we go down here below, to run a script block. Before I go into the details of the script block, just if I go all the way down here, you'll see that script block is using that $ credential. It's using that credential that we extract, using that username and password we extracted out of Key Vault. Now, what does this do? Well, it's an invoke command. Well, what's invoke command? Invoke command is PowerShell remoting. And so again, this is a Windows example. So we can use PowerShell remoting, and invoke command is which way to do that, to run a script block. And that script block is essentially, it's pretty much a cut and paste of, if I were to go into Azure Arc, and if I go up to Azure Arc and I fill out the form to say, hey, I want to, give me a script to add multiple servers. And it asks me a bunch of questions about where's my target subscription, where's my resource group that I want to put these in, do I want public endpoint, et cetera, and it outspits this script. And so again, just like the token retrieval, I just more or less just copy pasted this, and I threw it into this script block, which you see here with a couple of key modifications. A couple of those modifications are, well, that service principal, again, that we extracted out of that Key Vault, is essentially injected. So I use that, I pass those values in, the ID and the secret for the SPN client, so that when I go down to this connect string that you see here, I use those values when invoking, hey, this is where I want to connect you to from an Arc perspective. Here's the resource group, here's the tenant location, et cetera. But this is how I'm going to authorize, because this particular SPN, the assumption is it's role-based to have the Azure Arc onboarding role for that target resource group at a minimum, right? And again, we do this securely. The operator doesn't even need to know, the person running this, all they really need to have is the ability to run custom script extensions or run the run command on that, just that one Arc enabled server. Again, in our case, it would be that server that exists, going back here, my portal. We go to Azure Arc. We're going to run it off of this Win2K22 server here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it and see how this thing in action. So because it's Arc enabled, and again, some of the stuff we talk about, and hey, some of the free stuff you get when you Arc enable any server is among other things, is the ability to run remote commands. And we can do that through the portal. We can do that assuming that we have the role-based access to that Arc enabled server to run custom scripts or to run run command, which is another way to run scripts, or really a lot of interesting for troubleshooting or diagnostic type situations. We can even script that into bigger scripts to do lots of cool automation. So in this case, I'll show you two different ways. So in my example, if I go back to my lab, you'll see that I've got these two servers here, KDS Win22.1, KDS Win22.2. These are just servers, and I've got them pulled up in the GUI. I'm not going to go into too much detail on exactly what these look like here, but you get the picture that they essentially they're just servers. They haven't been Arc onboarded. If I pull up their the Arc machines, there's no there's no evidence they're there because we haven't onboarded them yet. So we're going to onboard them. So I'm going to take number one. And the first thing I can show you, one example is we can use the extension framework, and specifically we can use the custom script extension because again, this is already an Arc enabled machine, and that extension is something that's available to us. So if I do that and I come in here and I hit next, it's going to ask for the script. Now I've got that script, as you saw, if you're paying attention, or you'll see in a second with the other example I'm going to run, it's up in a public endpoint on GitHub. However, in the custom script extension, if I run these through the portal, it wants me to feed it a script file that exists within a storage count. So I've just taken that same script and I've created just a regular storage count. I created a scripts container and I plopped that script right in there, this PS1 script, which is the same one I showed you earlier. And again, I need an argument, right? And in this case, it takes an argument of 1. So just so I don't mess up, this is the name of my server. I'm going to pick this one, KDS Win22-1. So if I go in and type KDS, Win22-1, and I hit next. Hopefully I typed everything correctly, and I hit create. Now what's going to happen here in a few moments is it's going to kick that off. It's going to run that script, feed it that argument, and hopefully we'll have a new our Azure Arc onboarded server as a result of that. While that's cooking, I'll show you the other example. Now remember, the other server is just KDS Win22-2. And the other way to do that is, well, I also have the run command available. So again, if you recall from my video from before, run command is still in preview, but is yet another way in which we can run commands remotely on not just Arc enabled machines, but any Azure VM, but now they're Arc enabled, so we can do that as well. And so I can show you the same but different, right? This is, the first is using custom script extension. This is using the run command, but this command is essentially, I got to add, it's via AZ-CLI, connected machine, run command, create. I'm going to create a new run command. It's going to run on my Arc enabled server. It's going to essentially run this script that it finds at this URI, right? And in this case, it's public. It could be private, and I could actually use credentials via the command, if so, like a token, for example, if it was set in a private storage account for some reason. And then the parameters are same, right? The parameter is this. It's essentially the same custom script extension, but it's essentially within the run command. So if I go ahead and just run this, and it's going to come up, and at first it's going to look like, oh no, it failed. It didn't really fail. This command is just basically reminding us that, hey, this is, this is in preview. It's under development, right? So it's still a preview. The run command is, but it's probably it'll take a couple 3 minutes to run here, and when it's done, hopefully successfully, we will have yet a second Arc-enabled server. So let's give that a second. While we're waiting for it, let me go back to my demo environment, and let me go back to, I kicked off number 1 first. So if I go to him, and one way I can check is if I'm on console on that first server we targeted, that's a good sign. The Azure Connected Management, this is the Arc agent that will pop up in your programs and features. So that's a good sign. It should have it installed. And so the next step, hopefully, is also successful, which is if I go into Azure Arc, I go to my machines, and if I refresh this view, you can see that's a good sign too. It's not connected yet. It hasn't figured itself out, but this is telling me that that script is in fact working. At least it's almost there. It's projecting that server into my account. As you see, now it's connected. So if I go back here, hit refresh again, it's connected. And I expect probably in another 30 seconds or so, there's my CSE is saying it's succeeded, which is kind of neat. But I can also refresh again, hopefully within another, however long it took me to talk through before I got number 2 kicked off with the run command, we should expect to see that here. In fact, just for kicks, if I go into, this is number 1, if I look at number 2 here, hopefully, yep, there it is. The agent is there at least. And if I refresh one more time, hopefully it'll kick off. So so that's pretty neat stuff, right? It's essentially, if I have Arc already, at least one server, kind of think of it as a beachhead server, I can exploit that server and use it to securely also deploy Arc and Onboard Arc to other servers at will as well. And that's the end of my demo. And thanks for listening.